Hello. Today we will tell you about a situation Jacob found himself in that will shock you. So, imagine you're at a moment when everything you knew about your life is crumbling right in front of your eyes. Jacob and Carla are standing in a building where they've decided to share recordings exposing a criminal network. With these recordings, they hope to change everything and give people the chance to know the truth about what's happening in their hometown. Everything seems normal, until that very moment when the one who's always remained in the shadows appears behind them. But before you get comfortable, please hit the like button on the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's so interesting to see who's joined us today. Now, settle in, we're starting. Jacob Simmons had always been haunted by the memory of his younger sister, Emily. She had disappeared when he was 12 and she was only 8. The police had no leads, and his parents had always seemed too tired or too resigned to care enough to look further. Over the years, the memory of her faded, but it never truly left him. As he grew older, it turned into a quiet obsession, one that gnawed at him in the quiet moments, the stillness before sleep. Jacob was now 30 years old, living in an apartment in Chicago, working as an engineer for a small tech firm. His life was orderly, predictable, nothing like the chaos and uncertainty of his childhood. But the disappearance of Emily had always loomed over him. It felt like something unresolved, a chapter in his life that could never be closed. Then, one evening, as he scrolled aimlessly through a forgotten internet archive of old news stories, he saw a name that jolted him from his stupor: Emily Simmons. It was just a fleeting mention in a photo caption, an article about the closing of a diner in a small town in Texas. She had worked there, the article said, just a few years ago. The photograph that accompanied the article was grainy, a black and white shot of a woman standing in front of the diner. It was Emily, the same girl from the picture he had looked at every day growing up. The same bright eyes, the same crooked smile that had always been on her face when she was young. The realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. His sister had been alive all these years, and no one had told him. It was as though the universe had thrown him this lifeline after all this time. He could find her. He had to find her. After several weeks of tracking down the leads, speaking to the former owners of the diner, and piecing together old records, Jacob arrived in a small town called Oak Ridge, Texas. It was a place that seemed to be stuck in time, a town where everyone knew everyone else, and life moved at a slower pace. Here, Emily had spent the last few years of her life, according to the people he had spoken to. She had worked at the diner, lived in a small apartment above it, and had a few friends, though none seemed to know much about her personal life. Jacob was eager, his heart racing as he stepped off the bus and into the sleepy streets of Oak Ridge. He made his way to the diner, the last known place where Emily had worked. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, and the smell of stale coffee and fried food hit him immediately. The interior was as dusty as the rest of the town, with faded booths and a counter that had clearly seen better days. The woman behind the counter, an older woman with thick glasses, looked up at him and frowned. "Can I help you, son?" she asked, her voice tinged with a quiet suspicion. Jacob hesitated for a moment, before responding. "I'm looking for someone. Her name is Emily Simmons. She worked here a few years ago. I think she might have been my sister." The woman's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition passing through her eyes. "Emily Simmons, you say?" she muttered under her breath, more to herself than to him. "Yeah, I remember her. She used to work here, but that was a while ago." Jacob's heart skipped a beat. "Where is she now? Is she still here?" The woman sighed deeply, glancing over her shoulder as if she were contemplating whether to speak further. After a moment, she shook her head. "No, she's not around anymore. She passed away a week ago." Jacob's breath caught in his throat. What? What happened? He could feel the room closing in around him, the air thick with a sense of dread he couldn't shake. The woman hesitated before speaking, her voice quieter now. "It was an accident, I think. She fell. But it wasn't a simple thing. I don't know the details, but she'd been acting strange in the weeks before that, like she was hiding something." Jacob felt his pulse quicken. He had found her, but it was too late. His sister was dead, and the mystery of her disappearance only deepened. He had come looking for answers, but instead, he was left with more questions than ever before. What had happened to Emily in those years? What had she been hiding? He left the diner in a daze, the weight of the woman's words pressing down on him like a physical force. As he walked through the streets of Oak Ridge, trying to make sense of everything, he noticed a figure in the distance, a man standing on the sidewalk, watching him intently. It was the first person in the town who seemed to notice Jacob's presence, and it didn't feel like a coincidence. As Jacob approached, the man turned to face him fully. He was older, with graying hair and a rough demeanor. The man's eyes narrowed as he took in Jacob's face. "You looking for Emily?" the man asked bluntly. Jacob froze. "Yes. Do you know her?" The man grunted, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Yeah, I knew her. I'm Johnny, used to run this place with her. She had her demons. And she got herself into something bad. Maybe you should leave it alone." Jacob felt a shiver run down his spine. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice rising with urgency. Johnny's eyes darted to the ground, then back up at Jacob. "I mean, people here don't ask too many questions. You won't get any answers. You better forget about her. Just go home." But Jacob couldn't forget. He couldn't leave without understanding what had happened to Emily. As Johnny turned and walked away, Jacob stood frozen in the middle of the street, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on him, heavier than ever before. Something had gone wrong. His sister had been caught in something dark and dangerous, and now Jacob was going to find out exactly what it was. Jacob's footsteps echoed through the streets of Oak Ridge as he walked away from Johnny, the mysterious figure who seemed to know more than he was willing to say. He had come to find answers, but the more he dug into his sister's past, the more questions seemed to arise. His heart raced as he tried to piece together the fragments of information that Johnny had reluctantly shared. Back at his temporary lodging, a small motel just outside town, Jacob sat in the dim light, reviewing the information he had gathered so far. Emily had lived in Oak Ridge for nearly 5 years, but it seemed like no one truly knew anything about her life during that time. The people in the town spoke of her as if she had simply arrived one day and quietly slipped into the routine of the place. There were no close friends, no family visiting her, and, most disturbingly, there was no clear indication of what had happened to her in the days leading up to her death. The motel's phone rang, pulling Jacob from his thoughts. He picked it up quickly, hoping it was someone who could help him find the answers he so desperately sought. "Hello?" he answered, his voice tight with anticipation. "Jacob Simmons?" The voice on the other end was unmistakably female. "My name is Carla. I knew your sister, Emily. I think you need to know the truth." The words sent a shiver down his spine. He had never heard the name Carla before, but there was something about the way she spoke that made him trust her instantly. It was the same intuition that had driven him to come to Oak Ridge in the first place. "What do you know about her? Please, I need to understand what happened," Jacob asked, trying to keep the urgency in his voice in check. Carla paused, as if weighing her words carefully before speaking again. "I knew Emily. We were close, at least for a while. But the last few months, things changed. She was scared, Jacob. She was terrified. And I think she knew something was coming for her." Jacob's heart skipped a beat. Scared? What was she afraid of? Carla let out a soft sigh. She was involved in something dangerous. But she wouldn't talk about it. "All I know is that she started acting paranoid. She thought people were following her. And then, a week ago, she was gone." Jacob clenched his fists, the anger building in his chest. "I need to know more. Who was she involved with? What happened to her?" Carla was quiet for a moment before responding, her voice lower now. "I don't know everything. But there's someone you need to talk to. His name is Max. He's the only one who might have the answers you're looking for. But be careful, Jacob. He's not someone you want to mess with. Max is part of the reason Emily disappeared." "Where can I find him?" Jacob asked, his voice sharp. Carla hesitated again before giving him an address. "He's hiding out in a warehouse on the outskirts of town. But I'm warning you, don't trust him. He's dangerous." Jacob hung up the phone, his mind spinning. Max. The name echoed in his head, filling him with both dread and anticipation. He had finally found someone who might know the truth, but the fact that Carla had warned him to be cautious only deepened his unease. Whoever Max was, he was connected to Emily's disappearance, and Jacob was going to have to face him if he wanted to get to the bottom of it. The night felt oppressive as Jacob made his way toward the address Carla had given him. Oak Ridge, which had seemed so quiet and sleepy during the day, now seemed shrouded in an eerie silence. The buildings stood like hollow shells, abandoned and forgotten. The warehouse was located at the edge of town, far from the well-lit streets and bustling areas. It was a place that seemed untouched by time, and as Jacob approached it, a sense of foreboding washed over him. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The moment when he would finally uncover the truth about what had happened to Emily. The door to the warehouse creaked loudly as Jacob pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty space. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of something metallic, as though the building had been abandoned for years. The dim light from a single hanging bulb illuminated the interior, revealing shelves stacked with old equipment and crates. And then, at the far end of the warehouse, Jacob saw him. Max. He was standing with his back to Jacob, leaning against a stack of crates. He was tall, with short-cropped hair and a muscular build. The way he stood, confident and unbothered, suggested that he was used to being in control. The tension in the air was palpable as Jacob took a step closer. Max turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he took in Jacob's presence. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice low and steady. "You've been asking too many questions. People like you don't belong here." Jacob didn't flinch. "I need to know what happened to my sister. I know you were involved. Tell me everything." Max's lips curled into a slight, almost amused smile. "Your sister was a liability, Jacob. She knew too much. She got herself into something she couldn't control. And now, well, she paid the price." Jacob's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about? What did she get involved in?" Max took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Jacob's. "There are things in this town you don't understand. People don't leave Oak Ridge without a reason. Your sister learned that the hard way." Jacob's fists clenched as he took a step closer, his voice rising with fury. "I want answers, Max. Now." Max chuckled, the sound dark and mocking. "You're not ready for the truth, Jacob, but I'll give you a taste." He paused, his eyes flicking toward the shadows at the far end of the warehouse. "You're standing on the edge of something bigger than you can imagine, and you've just crossed the point of no return." Jacob's mind raced as he tried to process the cryptic words. What had his sister gotten mixed up in? What had she learned that had made her a target? And more importantly, what was Max hiding? Before Jacob could ask another question, Max turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving him alone in the dimly lit warehouse. The silence that followed was deafening, and Jacob's heart pounded in his chest. Whatever this was, it was just the beginning. The air in the warehouse felt thick with tension as Jacob stood alone, the sound of his breathing echoing in the quiet space. Max's words lingered in his mind, as cryptic and unnerving as they were. "You're standing on the edge of something bigger than you can imagine." The words replayed in his head, leaving him with a gnawing feeling of dread. What had Emily uncovered? What was it that had made her a target? And what dangerous forces were now closing in on Jacob himself? Jacob hesitated, standing still for a moment in the dim light. He knew that confronting Max again wouldn't be easy, and yet he couldn't let go of the need to understand what had happened to his sister. She had been lost to him for so many years, and now that he had found her, only to learn of her death, he couldn't walk away. Not yet. He needed answers. He needed to uncover whatever dark secret had been hidden in Oak Ridge. He stepped forward cautiously, scanning the shadows. The warehouse seemed endless, filled with discarded machinery, empty crates, and rusted metal. A strange hum filled the air, as though the entire building were alive, waiting for something to happen. Jacob's mind raced as he considered what Max had said. People don't leave Oak Ridge without a reason. What could that mean? Was there something about the town that had trapped people in its web? Was it more than just a sleepy little place in the middle of nowhere? He couldn't stay here for too long. His instincts told him that Max would return, but he also knew he needed more information. The trail Max had given him was deliberately vague, and Jacob couldn't afford to waste any more time on riddles. He needed to track down the people who might know more about his sister's last days. Jacob pulled out his phone and dialed Carla's number, his fingers trembling slightly as he pressed the call button. She had seemed to know more about Emily than anyone else, and she was the only one who might be able to guide him to the answers he was desperately seeking. The phone rang twice before Carla picked up. "Jacob? What is it?" "I went to see Max," Jacob said, his voice low and urgent. "He knows something about Emily, but he's playing games. He said she was involved in something big, something dangerous. Do you know what he was talking about?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Carla spoke. "I knew this would happen. I warned you about Max, Jacob. He's a part of all of this, but there's more to the story than you realize." "More?" Jacob's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? What's going on in this town? Why was Emily so afraid?" What did she find? Carla sighed heavily. I can't say everything over the phone, but if you want to know what happened to her, you need to find out about the people she was working for, the ones who pulled the strings. Max is just a pawn in a much larger game. Where do I start? Jacob asked, his voice filled with determination. He could hear Carla's hesitation before she answered. There's a man named Eli Turner. He's the key. He's the one who started all of this. Find him, and you'll find the answers you're looking for. But be careful, Jacob. Eli isn't someone you can just confront. He's dangerous, and he has a lot of influence in this town. Eli Turner. The name sent a chill down Jacob's spine. It was a name he hadn't heard before, but something about it sounded ominous. Jacob knew that he couldn't back down now. Not after everything he had uncovered. He had to follow this lead, even if it meant walking into the lion's den. Where can I find him? Jacob asked, trying to mask the urgency in his voice. Carla gave him an address, a rundown building on the edge of town. It sounded like the perfect place to hide if you wanted to avoid attention. Jacob thanked her quickly before hanging up. His mind was already racing with the possibilities. He had no idea what he was about to walk into, but he knew one thing for certain. This was no longer just about finding his sister. It was about exposing a web of lies and corruption that had ensnared Emily, and now threatened to pull him under as well. The drive to Eli Turner's building was short, but the closer Jacob got, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched across the empty streets. He could feel the weight of the town pressing in on him, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The building itself was a grim, crumbling structure. The windows were dark, and the front door was locked tight. Jacob stood in front of it, staring up at the looming silhouette. He had no idea what to expect inside, but he couldn't let fear stop him. He had come this far, and he wasn't going to back down now. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open, the rusted hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air was stale and cold, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed in the otherwise silent space. The room was dimly lit by a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting flickering shadows on the cracked walls. Jacob moved cautiously, his footsteps muffled by the dust-covered floor. As he made his way deeper into the building, he felt the presence of something, or someone, lurking in the darkness. The tension in the air was palpable, and every instinct told him to turn back. But he didn't. He couldn't. Suddenly, he heard a noise behind him, a soft shuffle of footsteps. Jacob spun around, his heart racing, but there was no one there. He cursed under his breath and pressed on, determined to find Eli Turner. He reached the back of the building, where a narrow hallway led to a set of stairs. The faint glow of light filtered up from below, and Jacob knew that he was getting closer to something. Something important. At the bottom of the stairs, he found a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with old bookshelves, filled with dusty files and papers. In the center of the room stood a man, Eli Turner. He was older than Jacob had expected, with graying hair and sharp, calculating eyes. He was sitting behind a desk, his fingers steepled together as he regarded Jacob with a calm, almost indifferent expression. "So you've finally come," Eli said, his voice smooth and measured. "I was wondering when you would find your way here." Jacob stepped forward, his anger rising. "What do you know about my sister? What did you do to her?" Eli didn't flinch. "Your sister was an unfortunate casualty, Jacob. She was too curious for her own good. And now, you've come looking for answers. But some answers are better left undiscovered." Jacob's fists clenched at his sides. "I'm not leaving until I know the truth." Eli's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Very well. You'll get the truth, Jacob. But it won't be what you expect." Jacob's breath caught in his chest as Eli Turner's words hung in the air. "You'll get the truth, Jacob. But it won't be what you expect." The room felt suddenly colder, as though the very walls were closing in on him. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to turn around and walk out of the door. But he had come too far. There was no turning back now. His sister Emily had died, and Jacob needed to understand why. He needed to know who had done this to her, and why. Eli's dark eyes studied him with unsettling calmness, as if he were watching an ant crawl up a wall, knowing it would eventually fall. He leaned back in his chair, the silence stretching between them like an abyss. Jacob's hands trembled at his sides, but he kept his voice steady. "What happened to her? What was she involved in?" Eli chuckled softly, the sound cold and detached. "You really want to know, don't you? You want to know what your sister got tangled up in. You want to know the cost of curiosity. Jacob's jaw clenched. I've already lost her. What more could I possibly lose? Eli's gaze hardened for a moment before his lips twisted into a smile. That's the problem, Jacob. You're already too late. Everything your sister found, everything she uncovered, it's all been swept away. But the damage is done, and now, it's your turn. Jacob's mind raced, his pulse quickening. What are you talking about? What did Emily discover? Eli stood slowly from his desk, his movements deliberate and measured. He walked toward Jacob, his shoes clicking sharply on the concrete floor. She was like a dog with a bone, sniffing around in places where she didn't belong. She started asking questions about the people who control this town, the ones who pull the strings from behind the scenes. She didn't realize the kind of attention that would draw. You see, Oak Ridge isn't just some sleepy little town. It's a front, Jacob. A front for something much bigger, something that operates in the shadows. Jacob's heart pounded. What are you saying? Eli smiled again, but it was no longer a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew the endgame before it even began. I'm saying that your sister got in the way of something she couldn't possibly understand, and now you're standing in her shoes. The same shoes she wore when she was asking too many questions, when she started uncovering the truth. Jacob's stomach turned. He had known that something was off about this town, something was hidden under the surface. But hearing Eli's words confirmed everything he had feared. Oak Ridge was not just a sleepy town. It was a place where something much darker lurked, hidden from the public eye. Eli walked over to a file cabinet at the far end of the room and pulled out a thick file. He placed it on the desk in front of Jacob, pushing it toward him with a deliberate motion. This is everything, Eli said. Everything your sister found. It's all here, in black and white. Jacob hesitated, his eyes flickering over the man in front of him. Eli seemed calm, almost too calm. It was as though this was all part of some twisted game, a game where Jacob was the unwilling participant. But his need for answers, for closure, pushed him forward. He reached out and opened the file, his hands shaking slightly. The pages were filled with names, dates, and cryptic references to companies, people, and events that Jacob didn't recognize. But there was one thing that stood out, a recurring name, Eli Turner. Over and over again, in connection with everything from the local government to the police force to various local businesses. Jacob's head spun as he read through the documents. They painted a picture of a network, an invisible network that controlled nearly every aspect of life in Oak Ridge. The people behind it were powerful, untouchable, and they had been operating in the shadows for years, manipulating the town and its people for their own purposes. This is insane, Jacob muttered, unable to tear his eyes away from the documents. What is this? What are you involved in? Eli leaned against the desk, his eyes narrowing. What you're looking at is the reality of this town. We control everything, every business, every politician, every law enforcement officer. Nothing happens here without our say-so. And your sister, she started to figure it out. She saw the connections, the pattern, and she couldn't let it go. She wanted to expose us. She thought she could take us down. Jacob's mind raced. But she was just a waitress. She wasn't part of this. She wasn't involved in whatever this is. How could she have... Eli cut him off with a wave of his hand. Don't kid yourself, Jacob. Emily knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't as innocent as you think. People like her, they get in the way, and they have to be dealt with. Jacob stood up abruptly, the anger and frustration building inside him like a tidal wave. You killed her, didn't you? Eli's face remained unreadable. In the end, it doesn't matter who pulls the trigger. It's the system that decides who stays and who goes. Jacob took a step toward Eli, his fists clenched at his sides. You think you can just kill her and get away with it? You think you can control everything, that no one will ever find out the truth? Eli's eyes gleamed with a cold, calculating look. The truth is a dangerous thing, Jacob. You're standing at the edge of something you won't be able to stop. You think you can change things, but you're too late. Emily was too late. And now, well, now it's your turn. Jacob's mind was racing. He couldn't allow this to happen. He couldn't let Eli and his people keep controlling this town, hiding behind their web of lies and manipulation. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized how deeply entrenched this network was, how much power they had. His anger flared. I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done. Before he could finish, Eli's expression darkened, his voice cold. "You think you can expose us? You think anyone will believe you? You're just one man against an entire system. And in the end, you'll be nothing but another casualty, just like your sister." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Jacob felt the weight of them pressing down on him, but he refused to let fear take hold. Not after everything he had learned. Not after everything he had sacrificed to get here. "I won't stop," Jacob said through gritted teeth. "You can't silence me. I will expose you." Eli's smile was almost pitying now. "We'll see about that." Jacob's heart raced as he left Eli's office, the weight of the man's words still pressing against his chest. "You'll be nothing but another casualty," Eli had said, his voice dripping with disdain. But even as the dark prophecy echoed in his mind, Jacob's resolve solidified. There was no turning back now. He knew what had to be done. He had to expose the conspiracy. He had to take down Eli Turner and the people who had been controlling Oak Ridge for far too long. But Eli was right about one thing. Jacob was just one man, and this was much bigger than him. If he wasn't careful, he would become just another victim of a system that had been in place for decades. The night outside felt oppressive, the darkened streets of Oak Ridge stretching endlessly in front of him. The town seemed to be holding its breath, as though the walls themselves were listening, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. But Jacob was no longer afraid. Not of Eli, not of anyone. He had come too far to turn back now. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. He fumbled for it and saw Carla's name on the screen. He didn't hesitate before answering. "Jacob." Carla's voice was tight, almost frantic. "You need to leave, now. It's not safe for you anymore." "What's going on?" Jacob asked, his chest tightening. "What do you know?" "They know you're looking for answers. I don't know how, but they do. And they're coming for you. You have to get out of Oak Ridge right now." Jacob's mind whirled. He could feel the danger closing in around him. "I'm not leaving. I'm not running. I'm exposing them. I won't stop until I do." Carla was silent for a moment before she spoke again, her voice strained. "You don't understand, Jacob. You're walking into a trap. You don't know what they're capable of. They've been doing this for years, and they won't stop until they've silenced you." Jacob's pulse quickened. "I don't care. I can't let them get away with this. I'm not backing down." There was a long pause, and then Carla spoke again, her tone softer. "You're not alone. I'll help you. But you have to trust me. We need to move quickly." Jacob felt a flicker of hope. "What do you need me to do?" "I've been doing some digging," Carla said. "There's a meeting tonight. A meeting where they discuss everything. Eli, his people, they'll be there. If we can get in and get evidence of what they're doing, we can expose them. We can bring everything to light, but we have to act fast." Jacob's mind raced as he processed her words. This was it. This was the moment he had been working toward. If they could get the evidence, they could finally bring down Eli Turner and the shadowy network he controlled. Everything depended on this. "I'm in," Jacob said, determination flooding his voice. "Where is the meeting?" Carla gave him an address, an old abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. It was secluded, hidden away from the eyes of the public, perfect for the kind of secretive meeting Jacob had imagined. But it also meant that they would be walking into the lion's den. "We'll meet at the edge of the factory," Carla continued. "We need to be careful. If we're spotted, we're done for." Jacob's grip tightened on the phone as he looked out at the darkened town. The moment he had been waiting for had arrived. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't back down. Not now. The factory loomed ahead as Jacob approached, its rusted exterior and shattered windows casting an ominous shadow across the empty street. The quiet hum of the wind was the only sound that filled the air, the silence broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath his feet. He parked his car a few blocks away, careful to stay out of sight, and made his way toward the factory. Carla had said they'd meet at the edge of the property, and Jacob spotted her almost immediately. She was standing near a chain-link fence, her posture tense, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "Jacob," she whispered urgently as he approached. "We don't have much time. We need to get inside before they start the meeting." Jacob nodded, his mind racing with the possibilities. This was their chance, their one shot at uncovering the truth. If they succeeded, they could expose everything. But if they failed, the consequences would be far worse than either of them could imagine. They crept around the side of the building, staying low and out of sight. The factory was dark, save for a few flickering lights near the entrance. It was eerily quiet, as if the building were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Carla led the way, slipping through a gap in the fence and toward a side entrance. Jacob followed closely behind, his heart pounding in his chest. They reached the door, and Carla motioned for him to be quiet. She pulled out a set of lockpicks and quickly went to work on the door. Jacob kept a lookout, his eyes darting nervously from side to side. The door clicked open with a soft creak, and Carla motioned for Jacob to follow her inside. They moved through the shadows, sticking to the edges of the building as they made their way toward the heart of the factory. The sound of voices drifted through the walls, low and indistinct at first. But as they got closer, the voices became clearer. Jacob could make out the unmistakable tone of Eli Turner's voice, along with several others. Voices that Jacob didn't recognize, but that sounded like they belonged to people in positions of power. They reached a large, dimly lit room at the center of the factory. Through a crack in the door, Jacob could see a group of people gathered around a table. Eli was at the head, his face shadowed in the dim light. Other figures sat around the table, some of them wearing suits, others in casual clothes, but all exuding an air of authority. Jacob motioned to Carla, signaling for her to follow him as he carefully moved closer, peering through the crack. His heart raced as he saw the faces of the men and women who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes in Oak Ridge. These were the people who had been controlling the town, manipulating everyone for their own gain. Eli spoke, his voice smooth and commanding. "We need to ensure that our operations remain undisturbed. Jacob Simmons is becoming a problem, but we can't let him interfere. We need to take care of him before he gets too close." Jacob's blood ran cold. They were talking about him, talking about how they were going to kill him. This was it. They knew who he was. They knew what he was trying to do, and they were making plans to stop him. Carla grabbed his arm, her voice barely a whisper. "We have to go, now, before they see us." But Jacob didn't move. He was frozen, his eyes fixed on the group inside. He couldn't leave. Not yet. Not when he was so close. The evidence they needed was right in front of them. If they could get just one recording, one piece of proof, they could take down everything. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, quickly turning on the recording app. His hands shook as he held the phone up, trying to capture every word. This was their chance. This was the moment that could change everything. But as he looked through the crack in the door, he saw Eli's eyes flicker toward him. And in that instant, Jacob knew. His time was running out. Jacob's heart thudded in his chest as he realized they had been spotted. The faintest flicker of Eli's eyes had been enough to send a wave of panic coursing through him. His fingers tightened around the phone, holding it as still as he could. The recording app was running, capturing every word spoken in the room. But he wasn't sure how long he would have before Eli and his associates figured out what was happening. He could hear Carla's breath beside him, sharp and shallow, as she tugged at his arm, trying to pull him away from the door. But Jacob couldn't move, not yet. He had come too far. He couldn't let them get away with this, not now that he had the evidence. The lives of everyone in Oak Ridge, including his sisters, were at stake. And then, the voice he feared the most came through the crack in the door. "We have a rat in the building," Eli said calmly, his voice as smooth as ever. "It seems someone has been listening." The room inside grew quiet, and Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He didn't need to look at Carla to know she felt the same terror rising within her. They had been discovered. "Jacob Simmons," Eli continued, his voice rising slightly with anger. "He's the one. He's been digging around, poking his nose into things that don't concern him. I told you all this was going to happen. I told you we had to take care of him." Jacob's blood ran cold as he realized Eli was talking about him. He couldn't move, couldn't think of what to do. He felt trapped, like a mouse caught in a snare. But his instincts kicked in, and before he could second-guess himself, he grabbed Carla's hand and yanked her back. "Run!" he hissed under his breath. They sprinted down this hallway, their footsteps echoing in the stillness of the factory. But Jacob's mind raced faster than his legs. He needed to think. He couldn't just run. He had evidence, proof that could take down the entire operation. But he couldn't keep running forever. Not when he was this close. They reached the side exit, the heavy metal door creaking open just as the sound of footsteps behind them grew louder. Jacob didn't look back, but he knew they were being pursued. They had to act quickly. "Where do we go?" Carla asked, her voice urgent as they dashed across the overgrown yard behind the factory. Jacob's mind was racing. "We need to get to the town hall. We can broadcast the evidence. We can expose them to the entire town. They won't be able to ignore it then." Carla nodded. "But they'll be after us. They won't let this go. We need a plan. And we need help. Jacob's mind spun, trying to come up with a solution. It felt like everything was slipping out of his control, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let them silence him. Not when they were so close to being exposed. He couldn't let Oak Ridge remain a town in the grip of corrupt power. They ran through the back alleys of the factory district, weaving between warehouses and dumpsters. Jacob's breath was ragged, his legs burning with exertion, but he pushed through the pain. He could feel the weight of the phone in his pocket, the recordings of Eli and his associates, the truth that could change everything. But the truth was also a weapon, one that Eli wouldn't hesitate to destroy. They reached the main road, and Jacob signaled to Carla to slow down. They couldn't risk drawing attention. As they crouched behind an old delivery truck, Jacob pulled out his phone. He checked the recording. The file was still there, untouched. He could barely believe it, but the victory was short-lived. "They're here," Carla whispered. "They know we're close." Jacob glanced down the street and saw a black SUV speeding toward them. He didn't hesitate. Grabbing Carla's hand again, they sprinted into the woods just beyond the town, knowing they had only moments before Eli's men caught up to them. The forest swallowed them whole, the trees towering above them, the sound of their breath mingling with the distant rush of the wind. The night felt colder, darker. Every snap of a twig beneath their feet made Jacob jump, the sound of pursuit growing louder with every passing second. "We can't outrun them forever," Carla said, her voice strained. "I know," Jacob answered, his voice tight with determination. "But we can't stop. We just need to get to town hall. We need to get this out there before it's too late." But as they reached a clearing and Jacob paused to catch his breath, his mind flashed back to the files he had seen in Eli's office. The names, the connections. This wasn't just about one town. Oak Ridge was just a microcosm of a much larger system. A system that stretched across the state, and maybe even further. That's when it hit him. "If we just give the evidence to the press, they'll be silenced. We'll be silenced. We need to make sure it reaches everyone. We need to go bigger. We need to broadcast it live. We need the world to see this." Carla looked at him in disbelief. "How do you plan to do that? They'll be watching every move we make." Jacob's eyes narrowed as he thought of a solution. "I know someone, a journalist, someone who's been trying to expose corruption for years. They won't stop just because we've been silenced. We need to get the recordings into the right hands." The plan was risky, too risky, but it was their only chance. They had no time to waste. The hours seemed to drag by as they navigated through the woods, always staying one step ahead of their pursuers. Jacob's thoughts raced, bouncing between the plan, the evidence, and what would happen if they failed. There was no room for failure. If they didn't get this information out, everything his sister had fought for would have been in vain. Finally, they reached the edge of town, and Jacob led Carla to a small, hidden office building, a nondescript building that had been the center of much of the local resistance to the corruption. Jacob had helped the journalist Sarah on a few smaller projects in the past, and now she was their last hope. They found Sarah inside just as Jacob had hoped. She was an older woman, sharp-eyed and no stranger to danger, her desk cluttered with papers and old notebooks. When she saw Jacob, her eyes widened. "I knew you were in town," she said, her voice tense. "I heard rumors. What's going on?" "What have you found?" Jacob didn't hesitate. "I have proof. The entire operation. It's all here." He pulled the phone from his pocket, showing her the recordings. Sarah listened intently as the sound of Eli Turner's voice filled the room. The look on her face hardened as she heard the names, the plans, the connections. When the recording ended, she didn't say a word. She just stood there, staring at Jacob, then at Carla. "Get me the equipment," Sarah said. "We're going live." Jacob and Carla watched as Sarah connected the phone to a laptop, setting everything up for the broadcast. Time seemed to slow as the minutes ticked by, the weight of what they were about to do hanging heavily in the air. When Sarah gave him a nod, Jacob felt a lump form in his throat. This was it. There was no going back now. The world would finally know the truth.